My grandma's recipe book led us to a body buried in our garden. Would you call the police if you found a body buried in your garden, knowing your own grandmother put it there? I asked myself that question while standing in the rain behind the house where I had learned to ride a bike, shell peas, and tell right from wrong. My brother stood beside me with a shovel in his hand. My mother was on the porch behind us, screaming my name like she could still stop what we had already found. And at my feet, half covered by wet soil and tangled roots, was the corner of a tarp that had no business being there. 3 days earlier, I had been crying over a recipe for cinnamon rolls. Grandma Rose had written it in her careful slanted handwriting, the same way she wrote birthday cards and grocery lists and notes taped to Tupperware. Use warm milk, not hot. Let the dough rest. Do not rush what is meant to rise. That was Grandma, patient, gentle, practical. At least that was who I thought she was. After her funeral, the house felt too quiet, not peaceful, just empty in the way a room feels when the person who made it warm is gone. My mother wanted to sell the place immediately. "We can't afford to keep it," she said, standing in Grandma's kitchen with her purse still on her shoulder. And honestly, I don't want to drag this out. I looked around at the yellow curtains, the chipped mixing bowls, the row of glass spice jars Grandma had labeled by hand. "She's been gone 2 days," I said. Mom's mouth tightened. "And she was sick for 2 years. We've had time to prepare." I had not prepared. Maybe that was childish, but I had believed some people were too central to disappear. Grandma Rose had raised me more than my own mother had. When Mom worked double shifts or disappeared into one of her long silences, Grandma made dinner, braided my hair, helped with school projects, and told me that family meant showing up when it was hard. My younger brother, Owen, opened cabinets without speaking. He had always handled grief by doing tasks no one asked him to do. "What are you looking for?" I asked. "The recipe book," he said. "You said you wanted it." I had forgotten I had mentioned it. Grandma had a green cloth-bound recipe book she never let anyone touch without permission. Not because the recipes were secret, exactly. She gave away recipes all the time, but that book was different. When I was little, I once opened it while she was hanging laundry. She came in so fast I dropped it. "Some things are not for children," she said. It was the only time she ever scared me. Now the book was mine. Owen found it in the bottom drawer beneath the dish towels, wrapped in wax paper and tied with twine. My mother saw it and went pale. "Give that to me," she said. Owen froze. "Why?" "Because your grandmother asked me to handle her personal papers." "It's a recipe book," I said. Mom held out her hand. "It belonged to my mother, and she left it to me." "She left you dishes and quilts, not that." I stared at her. "You know something about it." Her eyes moved toward the back window. It was so quick I might have missed it if I hadn't spent my whole childhood learning to read her moods. Then she said, "I know your grandmother was private. Respect that." That should have been the end of it. Instead, it was the first crack. I took the recipe book home that night. For an hour, I sat at my kitchen table and ran my fingers over the cover. It smelled faintly of flour, dust, and the lavender sachets Grandma kept in her drawers. The first pages were ordinary. Sourdough starter, chicken and dumplings, peach preserves, but then I noticed the markings. Tiny dots in the margins, a dash beside one ingredient, a number written slightly darker than the others. At first, I thought it was just Grandma correcting measurements. She had done that in the margins of church cookbooks for years. Then I saw the same pattern repeat. 3 dots, a slash. 2 numbers, a dash, more numbers. I copied them onto a sheet of paper. The first full sequence came from the sourdough recipe, 40.712874.0060. I frowned. They looked familiar, but I couldn't place why. Then Owen called to check on me, and I read the numbers out loud. He went silent. "Those sound like coordinates," he said. I laughed because the alternative was too strange. "Coordinates to what bread?" "Put them into a map." I did. New York City appeared on my screen. We both sat in silence on the phone. "That has to be a coincidence," I said. "Try another one." The next recipe was apple butter, another string of numbers. This time, when I entered them, the map landed on a lake in Michigan. The third was cornbread, a cemetery 2 counties over. My skin went cold. "Owen," I whispered. "Keep going." I almost didn't. I should have closed the book, gone to bed, and told myself grief was making everything feel meaningful. But Grandma had hidden those numbers for a reason. And my mother had wanted that book badly enough to reach for it before she even asked why I wanted it. I turned to the recipe Grandma had marked most heavily: sourdough. The page was stained with oil and age. In the margin, beside the instruction, "Let rest overnight," Grandma had written numbers in tiny, careful strokes. I entered them. The map loaded. Then it zoomed in. Not New York. Not a lake. Not a cemetery. Grandma's house. More specifically, the back garden, the one behind the lilac bush, the one where she had grown tomatoes every summer, the one where she never let anyone dig. I drove there the next morning before work. I told myself I only wanted to look. The garden was overgrown. Grandma had been too sick the last 2 summers to tend it, and my mother had not bothered. The tomato cages leaned like bent ribs. The soil was packed hard beneath weeds. The coordinates pointed to the far corner near the old stone birdbath. I stood there with my phone in my hand, feeling ridiculous and terrified. Then I saw the marker. Not a headstone, a flat river rock, half buried in the dirt. I remembered Grandma placing it there years earlier. I had been maybe 12. "What's that for?" I had asked. She had brushed soil from her gloves. "So I remember where not to plant," she said. At the time, it meant nothing. Now I bent down and turned the rock over. There was a small X carved into the underside. I left without digging. I drove straight to my mother's house. She opened the door still in her robe, her hair pinned up, her face irritated until she saw mine. "What happened? What's buried in Grandma's garden?" All the color left her face. For 1 second there was no pretending. Then she recovered. "Nothing. Don't lie to me." Her voice sharpened. "You went through the book." She left it to me. She should have burned it. The words came out before she could stop them. I stared at her. "What did Grandma do?" Mom looked past me at the street as if someone might be listening. Then she lowered her voice. "Your grandmother survived things you know nothing about. Whatever you think you found, leave it alone." That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. I stepped back. Was someone hurt? Her eyes filled with tears, but not the kind that asked for comfort. The kind that warned me. "You love your grandmother," she said. "Then let her stay buried." I thought she meant her memory. I did not yet understand she meant something else. That night, Owen came over with coffee, work gloves, and the expression he wore when he had already made a decision. "We need to dig," he said. "We need to call someone." And say what? Our dead grandmother wrote GPS coordinates in a bread recipe. I looked at the book on the table. She hid it for decades. Exactly. That doesn't mean we should hide it too. Owen rubbed his forehead. "I'm not saying we hide it. I'm saying we find out what it is before Mom controls the story." That was what changed my mind. Not curiosity, not courage. The memory of my mother's hand reaching for that book. She had not looked confused. She had looked afraid. We went after dark because I was ashamed of what we were doing. That alone should have told me we were already past the line. Owen dug first. The soil was harder than expected. Roots tangled through it, and every scrape of the shovel sounded too loud. I stood with a flashlight, jumping at every noise. After 10 minutes, Owen hit something. Not a rock. Plastic. He crouched and cleared soil away with his hands. Blue tarp, old, brittle, wrapped tight. I stopped breathing. "Owen, I see it." "Stop." He did. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then my mother's voice came from behind us. "I told you to leave it alone." I turned so fast the flashlight beam cut across her face. She stood near the porch in her nightgown and raincoat, her hair loose around her shoulders. "How did you know we were here?" I asked. She looked at the hole. "I knew you wouldn't listen." Owen stood slowly. "What is this?" My mother began to cry, but she did not answer. That was when I called the police. My hand shook so badly I could barely press the numbers. Mom lunged toward me. "No!" Owen stepped between us. "Don't," he said. She slapped him. The sound cracked through the wet yard. Owen did not move. My mother stared at her own hand like she didn't recognize it. Then she whispered, "You have no idea what you've done." The police arrived with bright lights and calm voices. They moved us away from the garden. They asked who owned the property, who found the tarp, who had been digging. My mother said nothing. Not one word. When they uncovered the remains, I stood by Grandma's kitchen window and watched men in gloves lift pieces of the past from the soil. I expected my mother to collapse. Instead, she sat at the table, perfectly still, staring at the recipe book. An officer asked her if she knew who might be buried there. She said no, but her hands were clenched so tightly her knuckles looked white. By morning, the house was taped off. By afternoon, the whole town knew. By evening, my grandmother's name was attached to words I could not bear to hear. Human remains, suspicious circumstances, possible homicide. I kept waiting for someone official to tell us it was old, historical, a mistake. Then Detective Alvarez came to my apartment 2 days later. He was careful with his words. The remains appear to belong to an adult male, he said. We don't have an identification yet. I gripped my mug. How long? Preliminary estimate suggests several decades. Several decades. I thought of Grandma's hands kneading bread, Grandma teaching Sunday school, Grandma humming while she hung sheets. What happens now? I asked. We continue identifying him. He paused. Your mother has refused to answer questions without an attorney. That should not have felt like betrayal. Everyone had rights, but my mother had not refused because she knew nothing. She had refused because she knew too much. After he left, I opened the recipe book again. This time, I wasn't looking for coordinates. I was looking for a story. The marked recipes were not random. Sourdough, apple butter, cornbread, pickled beets, tomato jam. All recipes from the same year, written in the same darker ink. At the bottom of the tomato jam page, I found something I had missed. A line that did not belong in any recipe. Too much sugar hides the rot. I drove back to Grandma's house as soon as police released it. The garden was covered with plywood and disturbed soil. The house smelled stale, as if strangers had opened every drawer and left the memories exposed. I went straight to the pantry. Grandma had kept everything: receipts in tins, rubber bands around old letters, church bulletins stacked by year. In a metal flour canister on the highest shelf, I found a bundle of envelopes tied with faded blue ribbon. They were addressed to my grandmother, not as Rose Whittaker, as Rosalie Vance. I sat on the pantry floor. Vance was my grandfather's last name, the man I had never met. The man my mother told me had abandoned them when she was 7. The man Grandma said was not worth remembering. His letters began sweet. Rosalie, I'm sorry. Rosalie, please let me see my girl. Rosalie, I know I failed you, but I never stopped loving her. Then they changed. I know what you told everyone. I know why you did it. You can keep the house, but you will not keep my daughter from me. The final letter was dated 41 years ago. I'm coming Friday. If you won't tell her the truth, I will. Friday. I checked the recipe book. The sourdough entry with the garden coordinates was dated that same week. My grandfather had come back. Then he vanished. I called Owen. He came over immediately and I showed him the letters. So Grandma killed Grandpa? He said quietly. I hated how simple it sounded. We don't know that. He threatened to expose something, then he ended up in her garden. I looked down at the letters. What truth was he talking about? Owen read the final letter again. Maybe he didn't abandon Mom. My throat tightened. My mother had built her whole life around being left. It was the reason she never trusted anyone. The reason she held grudges like heirlooms. The reason every hard conversation ended with her saying, "People leave when they are done with you." What if that wound had been planted there? What if Grandma had lied? I took the letters to my mother. Her attorney was there, a thin woman with silver glasses who tried to stop me at the door. Mom sat in her living room wrapped in a cardigan, looking older than she had the week before. I placed the letters on the coffee table. Was that Dad? I asked. She closed her eyes. Her attorney said, "Do not answer that." Mom opened them again. Yes, the room shifted. Grandma told you he abandoned you. She told everyone that. But he wrote to her, he wanted to see you. Mom's face crumpled in a way that almost made me reach for her. Almost. I never got those, she whispered. You knew he was in the garden. She shook her head hard. No, I knew something was there. I didn't know it was him. Then why did you try to stop me? Because my mother told me if anyone ever dug there, everything would be destroyed. What did that mean? Mom looked at her attorney. The woman shook her head. Mom ignored her. She said my father was dangerous. She said he had hurt us. She said if people found out, they would blame her for protecting me. I stared at her. And you believed her? She was my mother. The words landed between us like an accusation, as if love excused obedience, as if being someone's daughter meant surrendering the truth. You were going to let him stay buried, I said. Mom's voice hardened. I was going to let my mother rest. No, you were going to protect a lie. Her eyes flashed. You don't understand what it is like to be raised by someone who saved you. I leaned forward. Saved you from what? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out, because she did not know. That was the midpoint of it all. Until then, I had believed my grandmother had buried a man to hide a crime. But the deeper horror was this: my mother had spent her entire life protecting a story she had never verified, and Grandma had not just buried a body. She had buried my mother's childhood with it. The identification came back a week later. The remains belonged to Thomas Vance, my grandfather. Cause of death was harder. Too much time had passed, but there was evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull. Detective Alvarez asked if Grandma had ever mentioned him. No, I said. Never. Your mother? She said he left. He nodded like he had expected that. Then he showed me a photograph. It was old, creased, and taken from a missing persons report filed 41 years ago by Thomas's sister. I had never seen my grandfather's face before. He had kind eyes. That was what broke me. Not the report, not the skull fracture. His eyes. I cried in my car until my chest hurt. Then I went back to the recipe book, because Grandma had left the coordinates. She had hidden them, yes, but she had also preserved them. Why? If she wanted the secret buried forever, why write a map? The answer was somewhere in the book. I read every page, every recipe, every note. At first, I found nothing. Then I noticed the dates. The marked recipes did not just point to places. They followed a timeline. New York City, Michigan Lake, a cemetery, the garden. They were not random coordinates. They were places connected to my grandfather. I searched his name online and found old public records. Thomas Vance had lived in New York before he married Grandma. His parents had retired near the lake in Michigan. His mother was buried in that cemetery. The garden was the end of the trail. Grandma had made a map of his life. Then she hid the last stop in a bread recipe. At the very back of the book, the inside cover had been glued down. I only noticed because the paper bubbled at the corner. I slid a butter knife beneath it and peeled carefully. A folded note slipped out. My hands shook when I opened it. It was Grandma's handwriting. If this is found, then either I was too cowardly to speak, or Rose Whittaker finally ran out of time. I sat down before my knees gave out. The note was not a confession. Not exactly. It was worse. Grandma wrote that Thomas had come to the house that Friday, just as he promised. He wanted to take my mother for the weekend. He wanted to show her letters Grandma had hidden. He wanted her to know he had never abandoned her. Grandma wrote that she panicked, not because he was violent. Because he was right. She had lied for years. She had told people Thomas drank, gambled, disappeared, threatened her. Some of it had been true early in their marriage, she wrote, enough to make people believe the rest. But he had gotten sober. He had found steady work. He had tried to come back. And Grandma could not bear the thought of my mother choosing him. That was the deepest truth. Not self-defense. Not protection. Possession. My grandmother had not killed because Thomas was trying to hurt her. She killed because he was trying to tell the truth. The note said they argued in the kitchen. He reached for the recipe book because she had tucked his letters inside it. She grabbed the cast iron pan from the stove. One blow, then another. Afterward, she wrapped him in a tarp from the shed and buried him where the tomato bed had already been turned. I stopped reading. I wanted to throw the note across the room. I wanted to burn the book. I wanted my grandmother back for 5 minutes so I could ask how the same hands that fed me had done that. But there was more. The last paragraph was written shakier than the rest. My daughter thinks her father left because I taught her to think that. She built her life around my sin. If I tell her now, she will hate me. If I stay silent, she will hate everyone else. I do not know which is worse. Then one final line. Too much sugar hides the rot, but not forever. I called Detective Alvarez. Then I called my mother. She answered on the 4th ring. I found Grandma's note, I said. Silence. She admitted it. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before, small, almost childlike. "She killed him," she whispered. "Yes, and he came back for me?" I closed my eyes. "Yes." For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Mom said, "She told me he didn't want me." I heard 41 years collapse inside that sentence, all her anger, all her suspicion, all the times she had pushed people away before they could leave. All of it had roots in a lie. "I'm sorry," I said. I meant it. I was angry at her, but I was sorry too. The two feelings sat beside each other, neither canceling the other out. The investigation moved quickly after that. Grandma was gone, so there would be no trial for murder. But there was still truth to uncover. The official report was amended. Thomas Vance was no longer a man who abandoned his family. He was a missing father whose remains had been found in the yard of the woman who had lied about him for decades. His sister was still alive. Her name was Ruth. She was 83 and lived 2 towns away. When Detective Alvarez asked if I wanted her contact information, I hesitated. Meeting her felt like opening another door. But this door belonged to the same house, so I called. Ruth cried before I finished saying my name. "I knew he didn't leave," she said. "I knew my brother." 2 days later, she came to Grandma's house. She brought a shoebox. Inside were photographs of my grandfather, Thomas holding my mother as a baby, Thomas standing beside a truck, Thomas smiling at a birthday cake with 1 candle. On the back he had written, "My girl likes strawberries." My mother stood across the room, arms folded, face rigid. Ruth looked at her gently. "You have his eyes," she said. Mom broke, not neatly, not beautifully. She made a sound like something being torn out of her. Ruth crossed the room and held her. For the first time in my life, I watched my mother let someone comfort her without pulling away. The house was not sold immediately. Mom stopped pushing. Owen and I cleaned it slowly, room by room, not to preserve Grandma as a saint, not anymore. We kept what was true and let go of what was not. The recipe book became evidence for a while. When it was returned, I could barely look at it. Then one morning, I opened to the cinnamon rolls. Use warm milk, not hot. Let the dough rest. Do not rush what is meant to rise. I cried again, but differently, because grief had changed shape. I no longer missed the grandmother I thought I had. I mourned her. There was a difference. Missing someone asks for them back. Mourning admits they are gone, and that maybe they were never exactly who you believed. My mother and I did not become close overnight. That would have been too easy. There were too many years of sharp words, withheld affection, and silence. But one afternoon, she came to my apartment with a paper bag. Inside was a carton of strawberries. "I don't remember liking them," she said. I let her in. We made shortcake from one of Grandma's recipes, but I changed it. Less sugar. Mom noticed. For the first time in weeks, she almost smiled. At Thomas's memorial, there were not many people. Just family, a few old neighbors, Detective Alvarez standing respectfully at the back, and Ruth holding a framed photograph of her brother. My mother spoke. Her voice shook, but she did not stop. "My father did not abandon me," she said. "He was taken from me. And I spent most of my life believing the wrong person had hurt me." She looked at me then. "I passed that hurt on. I am responsible for that." I had waited my whole life to hear my mother take responsibility for anything. It did not fix everything. But it opened a window in a room I thought would never have air. After the service, we buried Thomas beside his parents. Not in the garden, not under vegetables and lies, under his own name. A few weeks later, Owen put a bench where the tomato bed had been. My mother wanted to remove the garden completely, but I said no. "Things can grow there," I told her. That was never the garden's fault. The following spring, we planted strawberries, not tomatoes, not flowers, strawberries. For the man who remembered what his little girl liked, even when everyone else tried to erase him. Sometimes people ask why Grandma left the coordinates if she never had the courage to confess. I think guilt wants to be found. Even when a person is too afraid to speak, the truth keeps looking for a way out. Grandma hid the map in the one thing she knew I would keep, a recipe book, a family treasure. A soft, harmless thing filled with sugar and flour and instructions for feeding the people you love. But love without truth can become another kind of grave. I still cook from that book sometimes, not because I forgive everything. I don't. but because history is not healed by pretending only one part of it existed. When I turn the pages, I see both women now. The grandmother who packed my lunches. And the woman who buried my grandfather. The mother who tried to stop me. And the daughter who had been lied to since she was 7. The little girl in me still wishes the story had ended with cinnamon rolls, but the woman I became knows better. Some family secrets do not stay buried because someone brave digs them up. Some rise on their own, through ink, through memory, through a number in the margin of an old recipe, and when they finally break the surface, you do not get to choose whether the truth hurts. You only get to choose whether you bury it again.